The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello, and welcome to Compass, a production from Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass. This is a weekly discussion of public policy and important issues facing our viewing area. This week, we will look at the impact that rural radio, TV, and print media have in our region. We'll also look at the challenges these outlets face as being the only source, for many cases, in rural news. We will also take a look at how technology and social media play an important role in keeping rural news relevant and timely. First, we have the story of how the Granite Falls Advocate Tribune is finding success as a multi-platform media outlet for 3 towns in their area. We'll also hear their reasons for why they think that the death of rural media is nothing but a myth. Here is Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser with more.
The power of, particularly of print media, is that once it's in print, it really becomes gospel. It really doesn't go away. There are examples of people writing things and publishing things that were not truthful and that were speculative, particularly from the mid-1800s to 1900. But since then, even in small towns, journalism has taken a much more serious role in disseminating information, and accuracy and reliability is our stock in trade. We can't be known to be somebody that is not accurate or truthful about things. So we have to stand for what we report. I think as long as a small newspaper or a small market radio station pays close attention to what's going on in their community and takes care of their advertisers, their customers, their readers, their listeners, they'll do just fine.
The Granite Falls Advocate turns its attention to hyper-local content and sharing stories across its communities, stories with heart and familiar faces.
You know, things are a little different out here than they are in a more regional center, a larger city, or in an urban area. We can't just write what we want to write in a column, perhaps, because we have to live with the folks that are reading our newspaper. There's times when you'd like to take exception to what maybe some governmental body or some organization is doing in the community, and you go, well, maybe I better be careful about that. And so that doesn't change the way we report news, but it changes how we present some of our opinions, and because we are sensitive to what people think and what people do. We have to live together with them in a small town. I'm going to run into somebody at the grocery store, at the gas station, or walking down the street, and we have to face our readers all the time. So in that way, we're very close to them. We're not anonymous. We're not just sitting in some office isolated from the rest of the community. We're part of what happens every day. But I think in rural areas, that closeness to our readership, that closeness to our communities and the businesses in our communities is a real asset for us. Every business struggles. I got to make sure there's no guarantee there's ever going to be any revenue in the door starting tomorrow. But there are some markets that are really difficult for newspapers because of the other media saturation and maybe the less connectivity that they have to their community.
Revenue is tricky for any small town business, but as towns shrink and people become more mobile, the media game has had to adapt to the changing financial landscape.
Obviously, we're a business. I mean, we have to make money to pay our people, to pay our expenses. We print the newspaper. If you're a newspaper, you pay to print it, you pay to distribute it, usually with the post office. And those expenses rack right up every week. Obviously, we have to pay salaries. We have to pay, to have lights on and other expenses that come along for supplies and equipment and whatnot. And that is always a challenge with small towns losing some of their retail businesses over the years. The trend toward larger regional or national retailers in fewer locations has hurt our revenue streams, so we have to look to different kinds of advertising. Less out-and-out retail advertising, more image advertising, maybe even a manufacturing plant that doesn't necessarily sell anything retail to any of our readers, is somebody that wants to be a part of the community and is demonstrating that, look at us, look at what we're able to bring to this community. And so we depend more increasingly on those folks for revenue streams. And as long as our advertisers are willing to help underwrite that cost, and they do, and as long as that continues to be the partnership, and we continue to help publicize their needs and their business opportunities, it'll work just fine.
According to the retired Smigluski, the future of any rural media business is a bright one, if the business is managed correctly.
As long as small town newspapers and small market radio stations pay attention to what's going on in their communities, I think the future is almost unlimited. There just isn't anybody that's really going to provide reliable, accurate information other than that media outlet. Like I said, some of the small market dailies, the mid-market dailies, are they're reporting things that people find in other places. The stuff we report isn't found anywhere else. We are not perfect. We make mistakes. I've been asked that question many times. Do you think you run as good a newspaper as possible? I always say no, we don't. No, we could always do better. The day that we feel like we can't do any better is the day we need to leave, because you can't take your eye off the road at all. You have to keep your hands on the wheel at all times. And, again, we provide information that nobody else does. And that's our stock and trade.
And with us now to talk from a print and radio standpoint, we have a couple of guests. We have Reed Anfinson of the Swift County Monitor News, and Maynard Meyer, General Manager and co-owner of KLQP. And Maynard's in Madison, and Reed, you're in Benson. So, gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We could talk about rural media for hours, because I guess that's the business we're in. But what we really want to focus on here, of course, is rural media and where we're going in rural media today, because there have been so many changes. There's so much talk about consolidation. And Maynard, in your case, you're still owning and operating a one shop. I mean, it's the epitome of what we talk about for community media. How do you do it?
Well, we've been doing it 33 years since we put the radio station on down in Madison, Minnesota, Terry Overlander and I. And, it's a day-to-day battle like it is in any other business, but the nice thing about it, both of us going into it understood rural media, local media, as we both were born and raised as Reed was here in Benson, so we came from this area. And we kind of had a feel for what people were looking for. We knew how we had been raised in the station we worked at over in Benson, and just kind of incorporated all those things we learned over the years into our own operation, and became an important part of the community, and it's worked for us for a long time and still is.
And as Maynard said there, of course, you two went to the same high school. You both grew up in Benson, and so you're back home in Benson. So this is more than just a job for you. I mean, this is really your life, rural media.
Rural media, or the newspaper business, is my life. I grew up in it. I didn't have a lot to do with it at first. I went to the University of Minnesota and graduated from their School of Journalism and worked for the Minnesota House and intended to stay in the cities, and then ended up back in Benson just for a while, quite a while ago. And as they say, the rest is history. And it's a business that I find challenging and extremely rewarding.
Yeah. Well, and I guess one of the questions that we often ask is what's the future, because people will hear national stories about, for example, a lot of consolidation in radio, or they'll hear about large newspapers that are having enormous struggles, or regional newspapers that, a big newspaper that may have been worth, $500 million years ago and maybe now be worth $100 million or $50 million. Enormous changes in the value of those large commercial newspapers. But it strikes me that small-town newspapers and small-town radio stations, there's still an important niche and there's still an opportunity, in part because you seem to be doing what nobody else is doing. You're telling the local story, right?
We have the local story, and I think our city manager at a recent meeting really put it just the way we need to think about it, and that is, we were having a phone call with a person from the Twin Cities so he wouldn't have to drive out on an engineering project, and he introduced the city council, introduced the staff, and then he said, and also Reed Anfinson representing the people of Benson. And in that simple statement, he said what our role is in our community. We represent the people of our community to the citizens so that they're informed and can make important decisions.
And I suppose in the business model for you, Maynard, as well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you're doing a local sports team, you're doing a local event, you're out at a remote, at a community festival, they're not going to hear that anywhere else, so they turn to you, right?
Right, that's exactly right. The whole key to it is to provide something they can't get anywhere else. You know, I think the death of radio is going to be total reliance on music that so many of the bigger stations do, because you can get music from your iPad, satellite radio, anywhere, and the music you want when you want it. So I think the days of tuning into WLS or KOMA as we grew up over the years for our music are pretty well done. You have to, for radio to survive, you've got to come up with some things that they aren't going to get anywhere else. And as you say, it's the sports. For us, it's still and some of the bigger stations laugh about it. We still do obituaries. I had 10 of them on my local news this morning from all around the area, unfortunately. We do the lost dogs, the lost cats. We always tell the story about how we found the hubcap for the city bus one day, the city bus, and on it goes. So, and to be an important part of the community, too, we're totally involved in it. I also serve on the city council. My partner is a county commissioner. One of our sales reps is the president of one of the other chambers of commerce in an adjoining community. So we just continue to get as involved as we can in it. So it's not just providing information, but it's being part of the community. And I think that's a lot of the success of it all.
Well, no, Reed, as you said, it's also about, you know, when you get introduced as being representing the people of Benson, I mean, that is not only necessarily how officials may view you, but also the people that you serve. That whether it's your readers or your listeners, they're going to say, oh yeah, they're out there being sort of eyes and ears for many of the things that I can't, or I need to know what they are, but I can't be every place at once.
You can't be every place at once, and people do talk with us. They do write letters to the editor telling us what they like about what we do and what we don't do. But it's really up to us to monitor the community and monitor what's going on and report what citizens need to know, not only to hold their elected leaders accountable, but to actively participate in the community in many different events. When newspapers disappear from communities, participation drops at all levels in all events in the community. There's fewer people running for office. There are fewer people attending civic events, fewer people getting involved in boards and committees when they don't have information provided to them and they're kept up to date on what's happening.
Yeah. And I know, Reed, a few years ago you were in the leadership role in the National Newspaper Association. So help us to understand what this is like in other parts of the country as well. I mean, is this your small-town newspaper story very similar to what you saw among your colleagues across the country?
As the president of the National Newspaper Association, I represented about 2,300 newspapers nationwide. And many of those newspapers were small rural community newspapers like the Monitor News or the Grant County Herald up in Elbow Lake. And they are facing very many of the same problems we are out here. The more rural, the problems get a little different the closer you are to a big metropolitan area. Mm-hmm. But in rural Minnesota and in rural Virginia or rural Wyoming, we tend to be the only source of information that the community has. If we go away, there's nobody covering the public meetings anymore. And there's nobody providing in the news about the man who drills a well and finds wood at 200 feet down, or the local character in your community. You don't get those stories that you have that create a commonality in the community and brings you together to get things done.
Well, I think that's, you know, the commonality of the stories, those things that knit us together. I know for many of us who, you know, grew up in media, loving media, watching it, participating in it, there was great fun in doing the thing you talked about, listening to WLS Chicago when you were a kid. But now there's a sameness to a lot of those. But of course, you know, again, you tune into your station or read your newspaper, and what you're going to get is this, you know, the sense of community that people, I think, really long for, because in so many other areas of media, they probably don't see it anymore.
Well, I think you're exactly right. One of the major metropolitan stations, of course, WCCO for years and years was the good neighbor to rural Minnesota. Well, they had stopped the farm programming, got rid of a lot of the personalities that they had, or some of them retired and passed on and weren't replaced. And I think that was an instance of, as you say, a station losing some of what it had, and a lot of it's probably financial reasons. You know, the times are tough for the larger stations as they are for the smaller ones. But that gave an opportunity for stations such as ours to jump in where some of those left off and provide things for people that they weren't getting. The the personality. I've always enjoyed that part of the whole thing. I worked at Morris for many years at the radio station there. I was Meyer in the morning, and I go up to Morris, and I'm still Meyer in the morning up there, and I haven't been there for over 30 years. So, and I've had people tell me, they enjoy listening to our station when the weather is bad because they find my voice to be comforting, which I had to laugh. I thought that was good. So you can go on WeatherBug or whatever on the internet and find your weather. But I think what people like about having the rural radio station around is you have somebody to interpret it for you and tell you what's going on, and probably field calls from some of the listeners around the area and give you a little more of a on-the-spot report than you're going to get by looking online.
Familiar voice, familiar words, familiar style, all of those things. Because it's a little bit like so many of us, if we can, familiar with someone's writing, we'll look through it and say, oh, I bet I know who put this together. Mm-hmm. Because you become familiar with the words and the use of the language. It's sort of the elephant in the room for a lot of people in the media business is digital, whatever that may mean. What's the online presence? Because, of course, if people are going online and they're getting used to getting something for free, how do newspapers deal with that? How would the radio stations deal with it? We've seen successes and some failures in the country with larger market groups, but I'd like to know how you're starting to address digital media. Reed?
We have, of course, we have a PDF version of our newspaper that people can subscribe to. And we have a digital version of our newspaper on a website that people can go to, but we put very little there, simply because it doesn't pay for itself. There are roughly 119 newspapers in the 7th Congressional District. In an internet-only world, a digital-only world, maybe 1 or 2 communities has a newspaper anymore. There is simply maybe 0 to 3% of the income for most of those newspapers in digital. There is no digital revenue source that pays for news in a community. You'd see them disappear.
Yeah. Well, another part, of course, about the economic model for newspapers was print jobs. That was a very big piece years ago that you had, you relied a lot on printing things for people in the community. And what's happening with that piece for a lot of local papers?
There's still a lot of printing that's done, but it's extraordinarily competitive, and the margins are low, and so a lot of that stuff is going out to print shops these days. But there's still newspapers doing it and still doing a very good job of it. We do it in Elbow Lake, do a lot of graphic arts. People still need somebody to do creative work for them. That's good creative work. Yeah.
When you mention good creative work, it makes me think about the people who will do this in the future, because obviously those of us sitting around the table have been around one part of this business or another for a very long time. I won't mention how long. But we've been doing this a long time, and sometimes we think about who's next. And during the break, Reed, you'd mentioned about the fact that in your case, you're looking to J schools, the journalism schools, and there's some great ones around the country. But what's happening with that? I mean, where are the new reporters going to come from?
A lot of the news reporters in rural America already come from self-training. We take people who have some ability to write, and we train them to be journalists. We do look to the journalism schools around the nation to provide us with trained people who know the laws and know how to write and know libel, which is important, but also have the ability to know what it takes to get the story written and on time, which isn't easy for a lot of people. So we are challenged. The journalism schools have moved more to multimedia, more to television, radio, and online, because some don't see a future in print. But print is extraordinarily important, and the way I always tell people, if they don't think print's important anymore, look in their mailbox. The one thing that the retailers know is that if they don't put their magazine in front of you every day or every week, you're going to forget about them. So print says, here I am, remember me.
Yeah, it does. And Maynard, I know, used to be talked about people who go to Brown Institute, which is not there, and there were these ideas that, well, if you wanted to be a DJ, here's where you go and here's where you end up. What's the career track now for young people who may be interested in radio? What's going on?
Well, I'd say to find a part-time job at the local radio station. That's how I started out. I did go to college and got a degree in broadcast journalism, but most of the useful, practical piece of the whole thing I learned with on-the-job experience. And I know that the people that we have working for us at the radio station, many of them had no radio experience before they started. Our office manager has been with us for 33 years now, and 32 out of the 33 that we've been there, and does our billing and traffic and all of that kind of thing. And Paul Ramo, who does quite a bit for you up here in Pioneer Public Television, had no formal training and is one of the best sportscasters around the area, and also does sales and news and all of that and on-air work for us. So it's really working from within. Going back and addressing to your question on digital there, it does provide some new opportunities for us in the radio business to extend our reach a little bit. it is competition for us in many ways, but we do stream 24 hours a day, which gives the audience a chance to interact through our website. We find it to be kind of helpful with the snowbirds down in Arizona and Florida. It's kind of interesting to look at the metrics and see where everybody's logged in, because a lot of them are I know that those are the people that are listening to us. They can take the radio with them when they get out of our listening area and still be tuned in. We've got one gentleman that goes over to Thailand every year and listens to us and catches the local news at 7:30 in the morning there. So, but it does add at some expense, and as Reed said, it's difficult to generate a lot of revenue with digital. So you've got to kind of balance out what you do. We do record many of our programs, our interviews and things, and provide them as a podcast, which is another opportunity for people to go and listen when they can't listen on the air. So there are a lot of opportunities. You kind of got to roll with the flow. You can't say we're just going to ignore it, because it's here whether you like it or not. So do something with it. So
yeah, and I think it's so many people that we've all known who said, well, yeah, I started out, writing a couple things for the local paper, or I started out in high school and I was doing the 10 to midnight shift on Saturday nights because nobody else wanted it, and that was their first entree. And I think one of the great things for a lot of people in that was they got to make their mistakes in a smaller way. They got to do it with somebody who was helping, somebody who was often interested in encouraging them, because it was a local person who got into the business and said, well, I really love doing this, and I can do a little bit of it here and sort of work out the kinks and learn as they go. It really becomes a continual learning platform, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You bring in somebody who's new to the business and you mentor them. They make mistakes. You try and help edit those mistakes out ahead of publication, of course. But you have to run once in a while and trip, and then you get up and get going again. But I think that we can do a very good job of training those people who come to us, who have a real interest in reporting on their communities.
Someone asked me years ago, they said, well, do you know many people in media who encourage other people to go into the business? And a stock line among them was, well, no, you never encourage anybody because they don't have a real drive and a love for it. They're never going to stick with it anyway, because most of them aren't in it for the money, and they're not in it because the hours are short.
Absolutely not.
Right, I think Reed and I are both at it for the same reason. We like what we do. I don't keep track of the hours. I don't keep a timesheet. I doubt if you do. And work all hours of the day and night. And of course, I also do the engineering for the radio station, and we're on 24/7. So if something dies at 2 or 3 in the morning, it's I can't just roll over and go back to bed. It's up to fix it. So it's always in the back of your mind. But I enjoy doing what I do. And as you say, it's not for the money. So.
Yeah. Well, not for the money. It's because you love the work, and also because it's important. Reed, you and I talked earlier in the break about the idea of the role that media plays, particularly community journalism or good public accountability journalism, in shedding a light on important issues.
We do. I mean, citizens will not know what's happening in a community if we don't report that. There's a case of Bell, California, where the newspaper disappeared, where the city manager and the chief of police and some members of the council ended up paying themselves an extraordinary amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's a case out of Seattle where there was one person in the audience, a citizen, sitting in the audience, and this is just recently, and there was some discussion about a park, and they came up and said they were going to go into closed session about this discussion. They didn't mention the word park. It was a document number, a long document number, and half an hour later when they came out of the closed session, that person was gone. No one was there, and they approved the sale of a community park to a developer for buildings. And the citizens didn't find out about it until it was over. And that's what happens when there's nobody to shine a light. One quote is, democracy disappears behind closed doors. We no longer have it. If we don't have an informed electorate, how do they make decisions? And in small town communities, the knowledge that citizens have is one reporter thin. That one reporter goes away, and they don't know what their public officials are doing. Most of your public officials have good hearts and good intentions, but there's just too much room for shenanigans when nobody's watching.
We've just got a couple minutes left here, so I'd just like to change direction just a little bit, because one of the things I love talking to media people is there's always great stories about what they like to do and what their favorite part of the job is. So, starting with you, Maynard, what's your favorite part what's your favorite part of doing small town radio?
Well, I guess just being able to interact with people all the time, and there's always something different going on. As I say, people call and they ask for the news director or the program director or the general manager or the engineer or the morning guy. they're going to talk to me. So I mean, it's never a dull moment. There's always something to do, and if I'm bored, it's my own fault. And I've been recently trying to upgrade our streaming service and work with more of the digital side of things. And I've been learning an awful lot about computers and things that I would never have otherwise known, because I've been forced into teaching myself some of this. So it's always just learning something new, and I think that's a lot of people when they retire, they want nothing more to do with computers. They don't want to log on, and I just find it fascinating, all the new technology and trying to stay up with it.
That's where television can tell a great part of your story, because you can imagine calling you, and it's the program director, hang on a second, Maynard holds the phone out, general manager, hang on, I'll get him, hold the phone, wait a couple seconds, pull it back. So is that probably what you do? You just kind of hold the phone
Pretty
back
much,
and forth?
I just run in the other room, grab it, so it's got a little different sound to it. So.
Yeah, and of course, change your voice and do something else. Great fun. Reed, favorite parts of the job?
That's the extraordinary stories we get to tell sometimes. It's a story of the World War II veteran who was at Iwo Jima. It's a story of a Vietnam vet. It's a story of the man who drills down to 200 feet and finds wood. And you get to interview a geologist who tells you that it was from a glaciation 500 million years ago. And those are fun stories to tell. It's also very gratifying to write the stories that inform the public about the things that they need to know. Those are important and rewarding stories. And I love photography. Taking the pictures of the faces of the community and publishing those is the fun part.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like it's all the sort of thing that you love to do, and you're going to keep doing it. And as someone who listens to your station and reads your paper, and I want to thank you both for the good work that you do and all the folks that you worked with, because I've been around this business a while, and I really appreciate all that you do. So
well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
And I think that's one of the things that makes our job as much fun as it is too, that we do have people coming up and thanking us for what we do, and they're grateful in a way that you probably wouldn't see if you were working down in the metropolitan area. So.
Yeah. Maynard Meyer of Madison and Reed Anfons from Benson, thank you both for joining us. That's it for this week on Compass. Join us next week as we take a look at the regional shortages of EMS and EMT personnel in our area, and one partnership that seems to be working against that and solving some problems.